Do you know on the Chabad calendar, they don't even mark the 15th of Av. They have Independence Day, they have this, they have that. Nothing marks the 15th of Av.
What's the?
I think that must be. It must be.
It must be, no, it's not
That
there.
must be an oversight. I'm assuming.
It's an oversight.
It's an oversight.
That's what I'm assuming.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's, I know, they're so scrupulous about everything. Whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. Then maybe they do have. There are some things I have noticed. There's some things, and they have a sense of when something is like very important and when it isn't. Like, for instance, there was when they took over the building, when Chabad of Northbrook took over the building from Ezra Habonim.
Yeah.
So there was an ark there, and on the ark at the top, there was a representation of the luchos. And it was, the rounded at the top luchos. And Chabad is particular to have them squared. Before Shabbos started, that first week, he had gotten them squared. There wasn't even a week where they were rounded on top. That was like a priority that it was very important that not be misrepresented. Also with the menorah, it's like very important to have the menorah with the straight arms. You will never see any Chabad illustration or actual menorah that doesn't have it. It's like it's messaging, like the messaging has to be very clear. But I just asked Rabbi Shimon, they have a Chabad, they have the Gan Yisrael, one of the Gan Yisrael camps is in, and has been for many years in our building north, where TLC is at Northbrook Community Synagogue. And so I asked him about this because the other day we were having this conversation, a few of us, about animals that are not kosher. Hey, Estelle. So if that there's an issue about gazing at non-kosher animals, and especially for young, impressionable children, you don't want children gazing at non-kosher animals. That there's a kind of impact, impurity, some kind of impurity. And this is a mystical issue. It's not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch as anything, but even it's not just, this is not something that Chabad's just sensitive to. This is something that even like Rosh Yeshivas were sensitive to. And it was even something within the yeshiva world that you were meant to be careful. So like if you had like over the crib, if you had, what do you call that thing? A mobile, one of those mobiles with little things hanging from it. So if you had like one with animals, people would not have one that had a pig over it or any kind of non-kosher animal on top of it, or they wouldn't give their kids teddy bears because
teddy bears.
Right, the bear is a treif animal. It's a treif animal.
A dog.
We had, and no, for sure not a dog. We had friends who had a chicken as a pet because they wanted to have a pet, but they needed it to be a kosher animal. So, but then when I was looking at it, so we had this conversation, group of people, and I was mentioning this, but I was looking it up because somebody asked something about it. And as I was looking it up, I noticed that the Lubavitcher, because, I know what it was. The question was, what do you do about Mashiach's coming riding in on a donkey? Mashiach's going to come riding on a donkey. A donkey's not a kosher animal. Or, and clearly you had Moshe put his whole family on a donkey. People rode donkeys. I mean, they had donkeys. They used them. They were around the house. What would they do with their kids with a donkey? Or also, there's brachos that you make on unusual animals and stuff. So, but how would you ever see the unusual animal? It seems like you're encouraged to see it so you can make the bracha. So I was looking it up, and I saw that the Lubavitcher Rebbe himself made a distinction, and he said if regularly, we don't want the kids exposed to this, but if it's an opportunity to make a bracha to Hashem, then then you do give them. So to see an unusual animal, you should give them the opportunity to see unusual animals so they could praise Hashem for the fact that he creates unusual animals. So I asked Rabbi Shimon about this, how do you work it out? Like, how do you balance it? So he said, that in the 1980s, it was like in the middle of maybe like 83. He said, if you look at a picture from the Lag BaOmer parades before like 1983, they have all sorts of animals or people dressed up as animals, or maybe it was a Purim parade. I don't remember if it was Lag BaOmer or Purim. Either they're dressed up as animals or you see the actual animals. And then he said the next year, suddenly there are no non-kosher animals. So, and he said it was the Rebbe had sort of sent out a message, but it was a kind of a low key. It was a kind of low key thing where so it seemed like it wasn't emphatic, and it wasn't like you're not allowed to have your kids do it, but if you can minimize it, it's good to minimize it. So they have certain things like that where they're very careful about, and then there's certain things where they're just not as careful about, and somehow they know the distinction.
In the
Using to them.
school, at the Cheder Lubavitch, they have they have the children's books, and I was looking through the picture books, and all the pigs are all covered up. They blacked them out.
With like a marker?
Yeah. Well, there was a piece of tape, like red tape or something.
Over the pig.
They still take their kid to the zoo.
Yeah, they do go to the zoo.
Yeah, so that was the thing. That's what he said. They were encouraged to take their kids to the zoo because the Rebbe he was emphasizing you still should go and see unusual animals so you can praise Hashem, for the variety of creation, because there are brachas to be made on unusual animals.
Yep.
But at the Lag BaOmer parade, there's not going to be a camel.
Oh.
Right. Rabbi Wolf, that you don't want to have some sort of personal contact with you. What about dogs? Now, dogs have their own, halakhic problems, but what about just the idea of having a dog?
Right. So I have noticed that from people, in other words, like Haredi people, both Litvaks and Hasidim, you do not see them have dogs.
Mm-hmm. No.
But it's a cultural thing. I don't think it started halachically. I don't know how to explain it. But there's a cultural, it's like a cultural thing when it comes to it. Because although there are halachic challenges, there's halachic challenges with a lot of things, but that doesn't mean you don't have it. But you just do not see Haredim. It's very rare to see any either Litvaks or Hasidim amongst the Haredim with dogs.
I wonder if Baal Tshuvas have more dogs.
Yes,
because they're used to growing up with a dog.
100%. And in Haredi neighborhoods, you will see people with dogs, and almost always those people are Bali Tshuva. But I have brought up, for instance, let's say I mentioned this to my father one time, because there was a kid in his in the community that had a very dramatic case of spina bifida. And this kid has a lonely life for the most part. And as would kids that have other debilitating ailments or disfiguring things, they tend to have a lonelier life. For that kid to have a dog is life-changing. And so if somebody would say, nah, we just don't do it, for a kid like that, you're not gonna. So to me, that's when I get annoyed about these things, because you don't have a official, you don't have an outright black and white halachic problem. Again, you have issues that you have to overcome, and so this kid could have love in his life, a regular companion, and love in his life, but you're not going to have it because it's pasnished. That I remember getting annoyed one time. He was telling me about this cute little kid, and that kid should have a dog. That's what dogs are made for.
Yeah.
What about a goose?
On this earth for that kid.
A goose.
A goose.
All right. Let's not go back to goose.
No, but then he'll have a goose. Somebody will shecht it. Like that will end up happening. It'll be a terrible tragedy.
For the fat, for the goose fat. Okay.
Yeah, just for the fat.
Okay.
All right. All right. That is that he commanded us to leave over. This is mitzvah number 120. This is for sure in that section of Kedoshim. It's in Kedoshim. It may be in other places too. That he commanded us to leave over the corner of the produce, the trees, and that which is similar to them. So when it says produce, it means things like wheat and barley, the stuff grown in fields, and also from orchards. And that is his, may he be exalted, saying, you shall leave them. After his mentioning the corner. And it is explained in Tractate Makos that the law of the corner is a negative commandment that is rectified by a positive commandment. Indeed, the negative commandment is his saying, you shall not wholly reap, which is in Leviticus 19:9, that's in Kedoshim. And the positive commandment is his saying, you shall leave them. The regulations of this commandment have already been explained in Tractate Peah, but by Torah law, it is only practiced in the land of Israel. That makes it sound like possibly there might be rabbinic law that says that extends this, but by Torah law, it's only practiced in the land of Israel. So I think that last bit where he's talking about the negative and positive commandment is that you might think this should just be a negative commandment. If the Gemara says it's a negative commandment and a positive commandment, sometimes he's looking to the Gemara to determine if something should be counted as a separate positive commandment. And then that discussion in the Gemara would help him to make that determination, because the Gemara itself said it's a negative commandment that can be rectified by a positive commandment. The question is, how would you do it after the fact? Let's say you gathered everything. At that point, you can't fix it. Usually when you say there's a negative commandment that can be fixed by a positive commandment, you mean something like theft. So the rule is you can't steal something. You can't take something that doesn't belong to you. If you did, you can fix it by returning it, the object. That's typically, we call it a lav hanitak la'aseh, which typically is translated that way, that it is a negative commandment that can be rectified by a positive commandment. But here, how are you going to do that? You got rid of all the corners, let's say. You've completely harvested your field. So how are you rectifying it? What are you leaving for the poor? You're not, There is no corner to leave to them. I'm just going to see if there's. All right, so this is from the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. When a person harvests his field, he should not harvest the entire field. Instead, he should leave a small portion of the standing grain at the end of his field. As it states, do not completely remove the grain in the corners of your field when reaping. This prohibition applies to one who reaps and one who uproots. The grain left standing is referred to as payah. Just as one leaves payah in his field, so too he must leave payah for the trees. When he gathers his produce, he should leave some for the poor. If he transgressed and harvested the entire field or gathered all of the produce of the trees, he should take some of what was harvested or gathered and give it to the poor. There you go. So that is how he's saying. So you're not really, at this point, leaving them a corner. The way you're fixing it is by you're taking some of what you harvested or gathered and then giving it to the poor. Giving this produce fulfills a positive commandment, as it is stated, leave it for the poor and the stranger. Even if one grounded the flour and kneaded it and baked it into bread, he should give payah from it to the poor. If the entire harvest was reaped and then destroyed or consumed by fire before he gave payah, then he's liable for lashes because he can't fix it. But you could still fix it even if it was baked into bread. You're still able to fix it by giving that bread to the poor. Alrighty then. All right, next commandment.
Is fixing a negative commandment the same as doing a positive? I mean, would you do it so that you could give?
So there was a discussion in the Gemara in Nedarim. No, in Nazir, in Tractate Nazir. So it said that there were pious people who felt that they were missing out by not being able to bring a sin offering. So they would become a Nazir so that they could bring the sin offering afterwards. Just, in other words, they became a Nazir, let's say for a month, just so that they would eventually be able to bring the sin offering, because they felt like it was a sin offering without a sin. In other words, the sin is not a sin with a stain kind of sin. That right. Is something like that. Although it needs but they, in other words, in their piety, they were not willing to transgress in order to bring a sin offering. And stealing is a transgression. Right. Okay. So I am assuming based on that they would not advocate stealing and then returning it, because it's still a transgression.
Or harvesting. Harvesting doesn't seem as bad as stealing from someone, but right.
But you've done a negative commandment. Right. And you've done a negative commandment, which means that you've sinned. You've done something wrong. Yeah. It may not be that bad, but maybe maybe we should be thinking of it as bad, as stealing. It seems more innocent and something you could do more. Something that could happen accidentally, but I guess stealing could happen accidentally as well. Let's say you have property right next to each other, and so your workers accidentally harvested some of the crops of the neighbor. I could see that happening almost as innocently as as accidentally harvesting the whole thing and not leaving the corner. There is a discussion about damage. Is damage a sin? Is it an avera, or is it just a kind of transactional thing where if you damaged something, you have to compensate the person, you have to pay them back? So, and this would be the distinction. Like, let's say one night, my friend has a pickup truck and I have a baseball bat, and it's late at night, and my friend drives the pickup truck, and we pass all these mailboxes, and I just break all the mailboxes as we're going along. And then later on, I replace all the broken ones with identical copies of the original ones. So have I done anything wrong?
Yes.
So the Rabbeinu Yonah suggests that damage is a subcategory of theft. And so it seems like from Rabbeinu Yonah that it is in fact an avera. It's not just a transactional thing. I broke something of yours, I have to replace it. But that there is also something there, something like it. So it would seem like you're not encouraged to do an avera, even though you can fix it. Okay. One, did we do leket? Or we're about to. That is that he commanded us to leave over the gleanings, and that is his saying, you shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest. It too is a negative commandment that is rectified by a positive commandment, as is explained about the corner in Tractate Makod. The regulation of this commandment have already been explained in Tractate Peah, but the Torah law, it is only practiced, by Torah law is only practiced in the land of Israel. So if you are gathering stuff and you've gone through and there's stuff still left from the areas that you had already picked and gathered from, you're supposed to leave that for the poor. And then we have the last one, which is 122, and that is that he commanded us to leave over the forgotten produce. So let's say you went through the field and you had some bundles of stuff that you were meant to come back and get, but you never did. You forgot about it. So at that point, at some point in the process, you are no longer able to collect it for yourself. Let's see this in the Rambam. So leket was the previous one. Similarly, with regard to leket, when one harvests or binds sheaves, he should not gather the stalks that fall during the harvest. Instead, he should leave them for the poor, as it is stated, you shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest. If he transgresses and gathers them, even if he ground them into flour and baked them, he must give them to the poor, leave it for the poor. If this produce is lost or consumed, then he gets lashes. Similar laws apply to individual grapes that fall during the grape harvest, to underdeveloped grape clusters. Do not harvest underdeveloped grape clusters from your vineyard, nor gather individual grapes that fall in your vineyard. Leave those for the poor. Similarly, if a person is binding sheaves of wheat into bundles and forgets one bundle, he may not go back and take it. If you forget the sheaf in your field, do not return to take it. If he transgressed and gathered it, even if he ground it into flour again, all that. Just as the prohibition against taking forgotten produce applies with regard to sheaves, so too it applies to standing grain. If one forgot standing grain and did not harvest it, it should be given to the poor. And also, so too it applies to all fruit-bearing trees. When you beat your olive tree, do not go back and take its glory. This law also applies to produce from other trees. I've seen some places where they shake the tree. I've even seen recently in some video where they have these these machines. They look sort of like those little digging kind of things, but they have a unique kind of pincer in the front, and the pincer goes around the tree, and then it shakes the tree, and it has they have like a tarp that is unfolded around it. It shakes the tree. Let's say it's an orange tree. It shakes the tree, and all the oranges come down into the tarp. And then you gather the tarp, and then you leave. So if you did that, I'm assuming that this would apply to this, that you can't go back. Once you've done that, you can't go back and get the rest of the oranges. There might be, let's say, 10 oranges left on the tree. Those have to be left for the poor.
Rabbi, when leaving the corners of your fields, are there measurements for if your field is this big, your corner is this big?
Oh. Yeah, technically it could be even the smallest amount, but there's a rabbinic suggestion about how much it would be. Did he say anything? He hasn't said it here. Thus, it can be concluded that there are 4 types of presents given to the poor in a vineyard: individual grapes that fall, underdeveloped grape clusters, the corner, and the forgotten produce. There are 3 presents from a grain crop: forgotten produce, the corner, the peah, and 2 from trees, forgotten produce, and peah. The owners do not have the right to give these presents to the poor to an individual of their choice. Instead, the poor come and take it against the owner's will. These presents are expropriated even from a poor Israelite. Which means if he has property, he has to give it. Wherever the term stranger is used with regard to these presents to the poor, the intent is a convert to Judaism. So when it says ger, a lot of times it'll say the ger. So the Rambam is saying it doesn't mean just a stranger. It means an actual convert. This is evident from the wording used by Deuteronomy 14:29 with regard to the tithe given to the poor. The Levite and the stranger will come. Just as the Levite is a member of the covenant, so too the stranger is a member of the covenant. Nevertheless, we do not prevent Gentiles from taking these presents. Instead, they are allowed to come together with the poor of Israel and take them as an expression of the Torah's ways of peace. With regard to these presents to the poor, it is said, leave it for the poor, and the stranger. Implied is that the obligation exists only when the poor demand them. If the poor cease seeking them and searching for them, the remainder is permitted for any person. For in contrast to truma, the physical substance of the crops does not become consecrated, nor is he required to give their worth to the poor, for it is not stated that he should give them to the poor. In other words, this might be like second tithe or something. You're supposed to eat the second tithe in Jerusalem. If you don't think you're going to be able to eat the second tithe in Jerusalem, then you redeem it onto money, and then you take that money and eat it in Jerusalem. So you might think, what if there are no poor? Or you just know they're not coming to collect your stuff. So maybe you have to redeem the corner and the leket shechem peah. Maybe you think that you have to redeem it onto money and then give that money to the poor, but you don't, because he's saying that it is it's not consecrated food. When is everyone allowed to collect the leket? When a second wave of gatherers gather after the first wave of gatherers and then depart. When is everyone allowed to collect the individual grapes that fall under developed grape clusters? When the poor walk through the vineyard and departed. What remains afterwards is permitted for everyone. When is everyone allowed to collect olives that were forgotten in Eretz Yisrael? If they were forgotten while on the tree, one is permitted to take them from Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the time of the second rain in a late year. One is permitted by contrast to take masses of collected olives forgotten under a tree after the poor have ceased seeking them. As long as a poor person has the right to take olives left on the earth under the trees, he may take them. Although people at large have already been granted license to take the forgotten produce on the tree itself. As long as one has the right to take forgotten produce from the tree itself, he may do so, even though he doesn't have the right to take forgotten produce from under the tree. So again, there could be a point where you have stuff left on the tree, and that you're allowed to take because they've left, but you're still not allowed to take the stuff under the tree until a later stage. Presents to the poor from the crops in the field, which the poor are not concerned, belong to the owner, even though the poor have not ceased searching for their presents. Which means other people can't take it. If you're not the owner and you're not the poor, other people wouldn't be allowed to come and take it. According to scriptural law, all of these presents for the poor must be given only in Eretz Yisrael, like Truma and the tithes. When you reap out, it has already been explained in the Talmud that the mitzvah of payah must be observed in the diaspora according to rabbinic decree. It appears to me that this law applies to all the remainder of these presents for the poor. All of the obligations must be observed in the diaspora according to rabbinic decree. What is the minimum obligation of payah, Lois asked. According to scriptural law, there is no minimum measure. Even if one leaves only one grain stalk, he fulfills his obligation. But according to rabbinic law, one must leave 1/60th of the crop, whether in Eretz Yisrael or in the diaspora, and one should add to the measure of 1/60th based on the size of the field, the amount of poor people and the blessing of the crop. In other words, you're encouraged to be generous. What is implied? When a field's very small and leaving 1/60th would not be of any advantage to the poor, he should increase the measure. Similarly, if there are many poor people, he should increase the measure. And if he sowed only a small amount and reaped a lot, he's been granted blessing, and he should increase according to the blessing. Whoever adds to the payah will give an additional reward. There is no limit to this increase. And this is famously said in our prayers in the morning, as we see in our prayers. Now we have to go to Safari screen. Oh no, do I have Safari on there? Why did I do that? That is completely, I was in Safari. My brain is just.
Yeah, he knows where it is. A payah.
That's it. Elu dvarim she'ein lahem shir. Liturgy. There we go.
A payah.
There's some
First one mentioned.
introductory prayers. Oh no, it's not there. Oh, there. Just give me a moment. I thought pretty well, and then I got completely.
What you like? Eila Devarim Shem Lehem Shir.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right there. A payah around.
Right. So no, it's the first one.
Yeah, it's the very first one.
Right. It's a brisa there.
Our young Malach Hasidim Talmud Torah.
Whatever. If I keep on looking for this right now, my brain has just lost its ability to make distinctions. But David is quoting it. We start off with it's a Yerushalmi. I think it's a Yerushalmi. El dvarim shein lam shir. These are the things that have no measure. And it's the first thing it says is hapeah, the corner of a field, vabikurim, and the first fruits, Apeh Vabikurim Vahara'ayon, which is the Korban Re'iyah. So Apeh Vabikurim
The appearance of-
Vahara'ayon and acts of loving kindness, etc. But it starts off, the very first thing was Peah. Then we don't have Peah.
Rabbi,
right.
when can the poor do that? I mean, do the poor have to wait till after the harvest? Or
No,
when,
they wait till the harvest. Well,
you know what I
well,
mean? I mean, they
yeah.
can't just walk into a field and take an orange off a tree and.
No, because he has had to leave let's say it's the corner, he had to already harvest everything but the corner.
Oh,
If
okay.
it's the tree, so he's had to have his people going through and harvesting, and then there's stuff left on the tree or fallen under the tree, then they get it. So they only get it after the harvest. I mean, Ruth is our Tanakh example of somebody who's doing it. It's also interesting because he says that technically only a convert has a right to collect it. Somebody who's just a resident doesn't technically have a right to collect it, but we let them, even if they're not Jewish. But so that word ger, he made the point that the word ger means a convert, and it's just interesting because Ruth is the one that we see doing it in Tanakh. I guess whether they recognized her as a convert at that point, I don't know. All righty. I look forward to continuing this tomorrow.